Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money today.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, it really got me thinking differently about, well, pretty much everything to do with money.
I know what you mean. It's not your typical finance book, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's not about picking stocks or, becoming a millionaire overnight.
Right. It's more about the human side of money. Our psychology, our biases, the stories we tell ourselves, all that.
Exactly. And how all of that impacts our financial decisions, even more than, like, knowing which funds to invest in or whatever.
Yeah, and one of the things Housel argues is that financial success isn't really about being a genius.
So it's not about having a high IQ or anything.
Right. It's more about understanding your own psychology.
So self-awareness is key.
Absolutely. And Housel illustrates this point with a great story in the book.
Oh, I love his stories. They're so relatable.
Me too. So this one is about a tech millionaire who made a fortune in his 20s.
Wow, in his 20s. Must be a financial whiz.
You'd think so, right? But Housel describes him as being kind of reckless with money.
Really?
Yeah. Driven by insecurity, always trying to prove his wealth, making these impulsive decisions.
So even though he was super successful in business, he wasn't necessarily good with money.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example of how intelligence doesn't equal financial success.
Because he probably knew all the right things to do with money, but...
His behavior didn't match up. He wasn't mastering his own psychology.
Okay, so if it's not about being a genius, what does determine financial success, according to Housel?
He points to Warren Buffett.
The Oracle of Omaha.
Exactly. And sure, he's brilliant, but Housel argues that his biggest advantage is actually time.
Time. Like, he's been investing for a long time.
That's part of it. He's been compounding his wealth for decades.
Compounding.
Yeah, like earning interest on your interest and then interest on that interest. It snowballs over time.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could be powerful.
Right. And here's the mind-blowing thing. Most of Buffett's wealth was actually accumulated after he turned 50.
Wow, really? I wouldn't have guessed that.
It's true. Housel calculated that if Buffett had only invested from his 30s to his 60s, his net worth would be 99.9% lower.
Whoa, that's insane. So even for Buffett, the key was just staying in the game for the long haul.
Exactly. It highlights how powerful long-term compounding can be.
That's actually really encouraging for someone like me who, isn't a Wall Street guru.
Exactly. You don't have to be a genius to build wealth. Patience and consistency are more important.
Speaking of being patient, this makes me think of another concept Hustle talks about, having room for error.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
He uses this analogy of card counters in Las Vegas.
Right. Even those guys who are tilting the odds in their favor know they can't predict every single hand.
Makes sense.
So they bet conservatively. They give themselves a cushion, so even if they lose a few hands...
They can stay in the game.
Exactly. And Housel says this applies to our finances, too.
So it's like having an emergency fund.
That's part of it, but it's broader than that.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
It's about having those cash reserves, sure, but also avoiding too much debt, being prepared for those unexpected bumps in the road.
I see. So it's not about just trying to optimize your returns all the time.
Right. It's also about building in that resilience so you can weather the storms and keep moving towards your goals.
I think that's something a lot of us, myself included, maybe underestimate.
It's easy to do.
Yeah.
Especially when we think we have more control than we actually do.
Which actually reminds me of something else Housel talks about. The stories we tell ourselves about money.
Oh, that's such an important point.
Yeah, we all have these narratives, right?
Right. We make up stories to make sense of the world, but sometimes those stories aren't accurate.
Yeah, and those stories can lead us to make some bad decisions, especially when it comes to money.
Exactly. Like believing that housing prices will always go up, or that you can get rich quickly with some magic formula.
Right. Or that the past is always a good predictor of the future.
Exactly. Those are all just stories, and sometimes those stories are wrong.
And they can be very seductive stories, especially when they're fueled by, like, our own desires and biases.
For sure. We want to believe we're in control, but the reality is there's a lot of uncertainty out there.
So how do we avoid falling prey to those dangerous stories?
Hausers argues it's not just about becoming, like, more rational or data-driven.
So it's not about becoming a robot.
Right. Because we're not spreadsheets. We're emotional beings.
And our emotions play a huge role in our financial decisions.
Absolutely, whether we like it or not.
So what are we supposed to do? Just accept that we're going to be irrational with money sometimes.
It's not about being reckless, but it's about recognizing that emotions are part of the equation. Sometimes prioritizing your peace of mind over a mathematically optimal strategy makes sense.
You know what? That's actually really reassuring to hear.
Is it?
Yeah, because I've always been a bit of a worrier when it comes to finances.
Ah, I see.
But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's kept me from making some risky moves.
That's a great point. And it actually reminds me of something else Housel talks about in the book.
Oh,
He mentions Harry Markowitz.
who's that?
Oh, he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist.
Wow.
He developed this groundbreaking model for portfolio optimization, like the perfect way to invest.
Yeah, how's impressive.
Right. But even he admitted that he didn't fully follow his own theory when it came to his personal investments.
Really? Why not?
Because he recognized that in real life, emotions and personal circumstances matter.
So even a Nobel Prize winner acknowledges that sometimes you have to deviate from the perfect plan.
Exactly. He prioritized peace of mind over pure rationality.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better about my own less than perfect financial decisions.
I think that's a good thing. It means you're human.
So if even the experts aren't always perfectly rational, how do we find that balance between being smart with our money, but also recognizing that we're, emotional beings?
That's a great question, and it's something Housel explores throughout the book.
So he doesn't offer like a magic formula.
No, but he encourages us to embrace this idea that personal finance is, well, personal.
Okay, that makes sense.
What works for one person might be a disaster for someone else.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. He stresses how important it is to understand your psychology, your risk tolerance, and what you actually want to achieve with your money.
Okay, so before we even start thinking about investments or budgets or anything like that,
We need to define our own version of success.
our own definition of financial well-being.
Exactly. What does that look like for you?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of us just default to what society tells us success should look like.
Right, we get caught up in comparisons, trying to keep up with the Joneses.
And we end up chasing goals that might not actually align with what we truly value.
Exactly. So it's about taking a step back and asking yourself, what do I really want? What will make me feel financially secure and fulfilled?
That's a good question to ponder.
It is. And once you have a clearer sense of that, you can start building a financial plan that actually supports that vision.
A plan that aligns with your values and your goals, not someone else's.
Exactly. And that's what the psychology of money is all about, helping you understand yourself so you can make smarter decisions with your money.
Decisions that lead to true wealth and happiness, not just a bigger bank account.
I like that. True wealth and happiness. That's what we're all after, right?
It is. And this book gives you a roadmap for getting there, one that takes into account the messy, emotional reality of being human.
I think that's why it resonated with so many people. It's not just another finance book. It's a book about life.
It is. And it's a book that I think everyone should read, regardless of their income level or financial expertise.
I agree. It's full of wisdom that can help us all make better choices with our money.
Choices that lead to a richer, more fulfilling life.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yes. So stay tuned because we're going to be diving deeper into some of these concepts from the psychology of money.
We'll be exploring the power of compounding, the importance of having room for error, the dangers of stories, and much more.
So grab your copy of the book if you haven't already.
And get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about money.
Because the psychology of money might just be the key to unlocking your financial and emotional well-being.
I think it is. So let's keep diving deep. It really is. Now, remember when we talked about those tales, those rare but massively impactful events that can completely derail our plans? Well, Housel argues that we often underestimate their importance, both in our financial lives and in life in general.
Right, those unforeseen events that can come out of nowhere and shake things up.
Hi.
I remember you mentioned something about German tanks and mice during World War II.
Yes. During World War II, a German tank unit was stationed on grasslands outside Stalingrad, and when they were needed on the front lines, almost none of their tanks worked.
Oh no, what happened?
Turns out field mice had nested inside the tanks.
What?
Yeah, and chewed through the insulation on the electrical systems.
No way. So the Germans, with their advanced engineering, were ultimately defeated by mice.
That's what happened.
That's a crazy example of how even the most meticulous planning can be undermined by something totally unexpected.
Exactly. And that's Housel's point. You can plan for all the obvious risks, but there will always be those unknown unknowns that can blindside you. And the best way to mitigate this is to avoid single points of failure.
So diversify your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, like they say.
It's more than just diversifying investments. It's about having backup plans, emergency funds, and a mindset that embraces flexibility and adaptability.
Okay, so being able to roll with the punches.
Exactly. And remember, Housel argues that saving money isn't just about knowing exactly what you'll need it for in the future.
It's about giving yourself options.
Yes, options so you can adapt to whatever life throws at you.
Okay, so how do we build that room for error into our plans? Any practical tips?
Housel suggests a few things. First, always maintain a healthy cash reserve.
The good old emergency fund.
Exactly. It might not seem exciting, but having that financial cushion can prevent you from making rash decisions during times of stress.
It's like having that financial breathing room we talked about earlier. You're not panicking, so you don't make bad choices.
Right. Second, avoid excessive leverage.
Leverage.
Yeah, using borrowed money, like for a mortgage or to invest, it can magnify your losses if things don't go as planned.
Because you owe even more than you lost in the first place.
Exactly. And finally, be honest with yourself about your risk tolerance.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is. Don't get caught up in high-risk, high-reward investments if you know you're going to freak out when things inevitably get bumpy.
It's about knowing yourself, understanding your own psychology, and making financial decisions that you're comfortable with.
Got it. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Housel tells this story about a young doctor he knew who had worked incredibly hard to achieve his dream career. But when Housel checked in on him a few years later, the doctor said,
What did he say?
"Awful career, man.
Awful career, wow. Why?
The long hours, the stress, it just wore him down." You know, it's a good reminder that we often romanticize our goals without considering the realities and potential downsides.
We think we know what will make us happy, but our values and priorities can change over time.
Right. Housel points out that humans are terrible at predicting their future selves.
So how do we avoid making major life decisions based on a version of ourselves that might not even exist in the future?
Well, his advice is to embrace flexibility.
So be open to change.
Exactly. Be willing to abandon plans that no longer serve you, even if you've already invested a lot of time or money.
So like, cut your losses and move on, even if it's hard to admit you were wrong.
It can be tough, but clinging to a plan that's no longer working can lead to more unhappiness and setbacks.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Sometimes you just have to accept that it's not going to work.
I like that analogy. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just start over with a new plan.
A fresh start.
Exactly. Life is a journey, and sometimes the path we thought we wanted isn't the one that ultimately leads to fulfillment. Being adaptable and open to course corrections is crucial. Now, shifting to a broader perspective, Housel also talks about how social influences shape our views on money. He particularly points out the power of pessimism.
Pessimism. How does that play into our financial decisions?
Well, he explains that negative events like recessions or market crashes tend to grab our attention more than positive events. It's partly because they impact everyone, making them a shared experience.
Right, we all talk about it. It's on the news constantly.
Exactly. And it's like that old news adage, if it bleeds, it leads. We're naturally drawn to drama and danger.
But you're saying this focus on the negative can distort our view of reality.
Exactly. Housel argues that while setbacks tend to be sudden and dramatic, progress often happens gradually and is easily overlooked.
Like that boiling frog analogy, right?
Exactly. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it'll jump right out. But if you slowly heat the water, the frog won't notice the change until it's too late.
We get so focused on the immediate crises that we miss the bigger picture.
Right. We ignore the long-term trends that are actually moving things in a positive direction.
This reminds me of what we talked about earlier about the importance of long-term thinking when it comes to investing. It's easy to get spooked by short-term market fluctuations, but history shows that over the long run, markets tend to go up.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have a solid investment plan and to stick with it even when things get turbulent.
Even when everyone else is panicking.
Exactly. Of course, he also cautions against relying too heavily on history as a guide. The world is constantly changing, so what worked in the past might not work in the future.
So we can't just assume the future will look like the past.
Right. He highlights major shifts that have occurred in recent decades, like the rise of the 401k, the growth of venture capital, and technology's increasing role in the economy.
It's a reminder that the financial landscape is constantly evolving, and we need to be ready to adapt. But with all this talk of adapting and changing, How do we even begin to create a financial plan that makes sense for us?
Well, Housel talks about the importance of defining the game you're playing when it comes to money.
The game. What does that mean?
He argues that investors often make the mistake of taking cues from others who are playing a completely different game.
So like comparing apples and oranges.
Exactly. Imagine a young investor with a long time horizon trying to follow the same strategy as a hedge fund manager who's focused on short-term gains.
Their goals and risk tolerance would be completely different. What makes sense for one could be disastrous for the other.
Exactly. Housel encourages readers to define their own goals and risk tolerance and to build a strategy that aligns with their personal circumstances.
So it all comes back to self-awareness, understanding your own money script, your comfort level with risk, and what you ultimately want to achieve with your money.
You got it. And that brings us to another crucial point Housel makes about managing risk, the wisdom of professional blackjack players.
Blackjack, like in a casino.
Yep. Specifically, those who practice card counting.
Okay, card counting. It sounds a bit like, well, cheating. But I'm curious, how does that relate to personal finance?
It's not cheating in the sense of breaking the rules. It's a strategy that can tilt the odds in your favor. But even the most skilled card counters know they can't predict every card.
So there's still an element of luck involved.
Absolutely. That's why they bet conservatively, even when the odds seem to be in their favor, because they know they could be wrong.
So they're essentially building in a cushion to absorb those potential losses. It's like having that emergency fund we talked about.
That's a great analogy. Housel argues that this room for error concept is crucial in personal finance too. It's about recognizing that unexpected events can happen, our predictions might be wrong, and we need safeguards to protect ourselves.
So having an emergency fund is like a card counter's conservative betting strategy. It helps us stay in the game even if we experience a financial setback.
Exactly. Housel also connects this idea to Benjamin Graham's concept of margin of safety in investing.
Graham, wasn't he like the father of value investing?
He was, and he mentored Warren Buffett.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this guy's the real deal. And what's this margin of safety thing?
It's all about buying assets for significantly less than their intrinsic value, so you have that cushion if things don't go as planned.
So it's like having a buffer to account for the uncertainties of the market.
Precisely. Housel argues this principle applies to all aspects of personal finance. It's about being realistic about our limitations, acknowledging we can't predict the future with certainty, and building in safeguards to protect ourselves.
I can definitely see how that applies to things like not taking on too much debt or making sure you have enough insurance.
Well, exactly. It's about being prepared for the unexpected.
And not getting too cocky when things are going well.
Right, because what goes up can also come down. Thinking back on some of my financial decisions, I've definitely been overly optimistic at times and haven't fully considered potential downsides. It's a common trap, often fueled by our desire to achieve our goals quickly. But Hauser reminds us that slow and steady progress, built on resilience and adaptability, is ultimately more sustainable.
It's about shifting our focus from trying to get rich quick to building a solid financial life that can weather any storm. But building a solid financial life requires a certain level of freedom, right?
You're exactly right. And that's another key point. Housel makes one of the greatest benefits of wealth is the freedom it can provide.
We talked earlier about his definition of wealth being more about what you don't spend, but how does that relate to freedom?
He argues that freedom is about having control over your time and making choices that align with your values.
That makes sense. Like not being tied to a job you hate just because you need the paycheck.
Exactly. Or being able to take time off work when you're sick without worrying about the financial impact. That's a type of freedom many people crave.
It's about having options and not feeling trapped by financial constraints. I remember when I was starting my career, I felt like I had to take every job offer, even if it wasn't a good fit, just to make ends meet.
That's a common experience, and it highlights how a lack of financial security can really limit our choices and make us feel stuck.
It can be really stressful.
It can. But it sounds like Housel is saying it's not just about having a lot of money. It's about having enough to create that sense of security and freedom.
Exactly. He makes a distinction between being rich and being wealthy.
Oh, that's interesting. What's the difference?
He defines rich as having a high current income, while wealthy is about having assets that haven't yet been converted into material possessions.
So someone driving a fancy car and living in a big house might be rich, but they might not actually be wealthy if they're living paycheck to paycheck and have little financial security. Precisely, Housel argues that true wealth is about building a solid foundation that provides options and freedom, not about keeping up appearances or impressing others. It's about aligning your spending with your values and focusing on what truly matters to you.
I think that's such an important distinction.
It is, and it's something we often lose sight of in a culture that's so focused on material possessions and outward displays of success.
That makes me think about those lottery winners who end up broke. They suddenly have a lot of money, but they lack the, I don't know, the wisdom or the
The
discipline.
mindset.
Yeah, the mindset to manage it wisely.
It's a classic example of how wealth without the right mindset can be fleeting and even destructive.
So how do we cultivate this sense of freedom and ensure that our pursuit of wealth actually leads to greater happiness and fulfillment? Not just like a bigger bank account, but a better life.
Right. Well, Housel suggests a few things. First, define your own version of freedom. What does it look like for you?
So what would having true freedom allow you to do? Travel, spend more time with family, pursue a passion.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what truly matters to you and aligning your financial goals with those values.
Not just chasing some arbitrary definition of success that society throws at us.
Exactly. Then focus on building a solid financial foundation that provides security and options.
So saving, investing, building that safety net
Yeah.
so you can actually pursue those things that matter to you.
You got it. And he makes this really interesting point about how saving money is like building energy wealth.
Energy wealth. I don't think I remember that part.
He compares it to the 1970s oil crisis. One of the biggest reasons we overcame that crisis wasn't because we suddenly found more oil.
It was because we found ways to be more energy efficient, like smaller cars, better insulation, that kind of thing.
Exactly. We adapted. Housel says we can apply that same principle to our finances. Instead of focusing solely on increasing our income, which isn't always within our control, we can prioritize reducing our financial energy needs.
So it's about finding ways to be more efficient with our spending.
Right. Making our savings go further, aligning your spending with your values, finding ways to do more with less.
This really resonates with me. I think a lot of us fall into the trap of thinking that we need to earn more to achieve our financial goals.
Yeah, we think if I just got that raise or that promotion.
Then all my problems would be solved.
But what you're saying is we can also make significant progress by simply needing less.
It's a powerful shift in mindset. It's not just about earning more. It's about being content with what you have and making conscious choices about how you use your resources.
You got it. And it ties back to that idea of defining your own version of success. If you can find contentment and fulfillment without needing to constantly accumulate more stuff, you're already ahead of the game.
That's a really important point, especially in today's consumerist culture, where we're constantly bombarded with messages about what we should be buying and how we should be living.
It's easy to get caught up in that cycle and lose sight of what truly matters.
I think Housel's book is a great antidote to that. It helps us step back and reevaluate our relationship with money.
I agree. It's a book that can change your perspective and ultimately change your life.
So to wrap up, I think the biggest takeaway from the psychology of money is that financial success isn't just about being smart or knowing the right formulas.
Right. It's about understanding yourself
Your psychology, your biases, your values.
and making choices that are aligned with who you are and what you want to achieve.
It's about building a life that's rich in meaning and purpose, not just material possessions.
Exactly. It's about true wealth and happiness. And I think this book provides a really insightful and practical roadmap for getting there.
I couldn't agree more. So, to our listeners, we highly recommend checking out Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. It's a book that can truly change the way you think about money and, ultimately, about your life.
And until next time, keep diving deep.